Tonight, we drift into the quieter corners of history. Not the stories carved neatly into textbooks, but the strange fragments left behind in ancient texts, ruined temples, lost books, forbidden maps, and whispered traditions. Some of these mysteries may be misunderstood history. Some may be legend. And some continue to make people wonder if the ancient world knew more than we imagine. So settle in, slow your thoughts, and let the past become strange, distant, and dreamlike. These are mind-bending ancient mysteries and conspiracy theories to fall asleep to. Long before the familiar stories of kings, prophets, and empires, there is a stranger tradition hidden at the edges of ancient scripture. It speaks of beings called the Watchers. In the Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text that was once widely read but later left outside most versions of the Bible, the Watchers are described as heavenly beings who descended to earth. They were not ordinary angels in this story. They were observers, guardians, and perhaps something more mysterious. Their purpose, according to the legend, was to watch over humanity. But instead, they became fascinated by human life. They saw the daughters of men, desired them, and broke the boundary between heaven and earth. From this forbidden union came the Nephilim, a race of giants described as powerful, violent, and almost impossible to control. In the Book of Genesis, the Nephilim are mentioned only briefly. The passage is short, almost passing by too quickly, as if it belongs to a much larger story that has mostly been lost. It says there were giants in the earth in those days. And then, just as suddenly, the text moves on. For centuries, people have wondered what this meant. Were the Nephilim simply legendary warriors from the ancient world? Were they the memory of unusually tall tribes? Were they symbolic figures, representing the corruption of humanity before the flood? Or did ancient people believe something far stranger, that beings from the sky once came down and changed the course of human history? The Book of Enoch expands the story dramatically. It says the Watchers taught humanity forbidden knowledge. They showed people how to make weapons, how to use cosmetics, how to study the stars, how to practice enchantments, and how to understand signs in the heavens. To some readers, this sounds like a myth about angels corrupting humanity. To others, it sounds almost like an ancient explanation for sudden leaps in knowledge. The story becomes even darker when the Nephilim grow too powerful. They consume the land, turn violent, and bring chaos to the world. Their presence becomes one of the reasons divine judgment falls upon the earth. In this version of the ancient past, the flood is not just a punishment for human wickedness. It is also a reset of a world that had been altered by forces that were never meant to interfere. That is what makes the Watchers so fascinating. They are not simply monsters. They are not simply angels. They are a memory of something crossing the line between the human and the unknown. And maybe that is why the story still lingers. Because hidden inside this strange old legend is a question people have never fully stopped asking. What if ancient humanity was not alone? What if the oldest stories of gods, giants, and sky beings were not invented from nothing? And what if some of the missing pieces of history were removed because they made the past feel too strange to explain? The Watchers remain in that shadowy space between scripture, myth, and mystery. A quiet fragment from the ancient world. A story that feels almost forgotten. And yet, once you hear it, it is difficult not to wonder what else may have been left out. There is a book that sits just outside the familiar Bible. A book filled with angels, giants, heavenly journeys, cosmic secrets, and warnings about the end of the age. It is called the Book of Enoch. For many people, the strange thing about the Book of Enoch is not only what it says, but the fact that it survived at all. Enoch himself appears briefly in the Book of Genesis. He is introduced as a man from the earliest generations of humanity, long before the flood. The text says that Enoch walked with God, and then he was not, because God took him. It is one of the most mysterious lines in the ancient world. No death is described. No grave is mentioned. Just a quiet disappearance. And from that small fragment grew one of the strangest traditions in religious history. The Book of Enoch imagines Enoch not simply as a righteous man, but as a traveler between worlds. He is shown the heavens. He sees the movements of the stars. He witnesses places of judgment, hidden chambers of creation, and the secrets of angels. In some parts of the book, Enoch becomes almost like a cosmic scribe, recording what he sees beyond the limits of ordinary human life. But the most famous part of the Book of Enoch is the story of the Watchers. These are the heavenly beings who descend to earth, break divine law, and teach humanity forbidden knowledge. They reveal arts and sciences that humans were perhaps not meant to possess yet. Metalworking, weapon-making, enchantments, astrology, cosmetics, and other hidden skills. From their union with human women come the Nephilim, the giants who fill the world with violence. It is a story that feels older and stranger than almost anything around it. And for centuries, people have wondered why this book was not included in most versions of the Bible. Some traditions preserved it. Others rejected it. In the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the Book of Enoch remained part of the biblical canon. But in most Jewish and Christian traditions, it became something different. A text remembered, studied, debated, but left outside the official collection. This made it feel forbidden, even when the truth is more complicated. It was not necessarily hidden in some secret vault, but it was not widely read by ordinary people either, and that gave it a certain power. Because the Book of Enoch seems to preserve an ancient imagination of the universe that feels vast, layered, and unsettling. The sky is not empty. The earth is not ordinary. Human history is not only human. Behind the visible world, there are watchers, messengers, rebels, judgments, and mysteries. To modern readers, it can feel almost like ancient science fiction. A prophet taken into the heavens, celestial beings interfering with mankind, forbidden knowledge changing civilization, giants walking the earth before the flood, and hidden laws written into the stars. Some people read the Book of Enoch as theology. Others read it as myth. Others see it as evidence of older stories that were once much more widely known. But whatever it truly is, the book has never lost its strange pull. It makes the ancient world feel larger. It makes the Bible feel surrounded by shadows and missing rooms, and it leaves behind one quiet, fascinating question. How many stories from the ancient past were once known, once whispered, once believed, only to fade into the margins of history? There is a quiet gap in one of the most famous lives in history. In the New Testament, Jesus appears as a child, then as a young boy in the temple, speaking with teachers who are amazed by his understanding. And then, for many years, the story falls almost completely silent. When Jesus appears again, he is around 30 years old, beginning his public ministry near the Jordan River. But what happened in between? What happened during the years between childhood and adulthood? For centuries, this question has fascinated readers, scholars, mystics, and storytellers. They are often called the missing years of Jesus. The Bible does not give a detailed biography of this period. It does not follow Jesus through adolescence, early adulthood, work, friendships, study, travel, or spiritual preparation. It only gives a brief impression that he grew in wisdom, lived in Nazareth, and was known as the son of a carpenter. For many religious traditions, that silence is not a mystery that needs solving. It simply means those years were private, ordinary, and not central to the message of the Gospels. But for others, the silence feels like a doorway, a place where imagination enters. Over time, many theories have appeared. Some suggest Jesus remained in Nazareth, working quietly, learning scripture, living a humble life, and preparing inwardly for what would come later. Others have imagined something more unusual. There are legends that Jesus may have traveled east, perhaps to India, Persia, Tibet, or regions along the ancient trade routes. These theories suggest he may have encountered different religious teachers, absorbed wisdom from distant traditions, and later returned to Judea with a message shaped by a wider world. To be clear, these travel stories are not accepted by mainstream biblical scholarship as established history, but they endure because they speak to something people find deeply compelling. The ancient world was more connected than many imagine. Trade routes crossed deserts, mountains, ports, and empires. Merchants, monks, philosophers, and pilgrims carried stories across enormous distances. Ideas did travel. Religions did influence one another. Distant cultures were not always as separate as they seem on a map. So the missing years become a quiet mystery, not necessarily because they prove a hidden journey, but because they remind us how much ancient history has been lost. There may have been ordinary days that no one recorded. There may have been teachers whose names disappeared. There may have been conversations, struggles, and moments of solitude that shaped a life but never became scripture. And perhaps that is why this mystery feels so powerful. It is not only about where Jesus went. It is about what history chooses to remember. The public life of Jesus is one of the most studied subjects in the world. Yet even within that story, there is a long stretch of silence, a silence wide enough for legend, wide enough for speculation, wide enough for people to wonder whether hidden chapters once existed, or whether the most important preparation happened quietly, far away from crowds, miracles, and written records. The missing years remain one of the great blank spaces of sacred history, and sometimes the blank spaces are what keep the past alive, because they leave room for mystery, they leave room for questions, and they remind us that even the most familiar stories may still contain shadows we have never fully seen. Long before Rome, before Greece, and even before much of the Bible was written down, there was Sumer, a land of city-states, temples, priests, clay tablets, and kings who ruled beneath the burning sun of ancient Mesopotamia. And from this world comes one of the strangest documents ever discovered. It is called the Sumerian King List. At first it seems simple enough. It is a record of rulers, a list of kings, cities, dynasties, and reigns. Ancient people often kept records like this to show who ruled, when they ruled, and how power passed from one city to another. But then the numbers begin to feel impossible. The earliest kings on the list are said to have ruled not for 20 years, or 40 years, or even 100 years. Some are said to have ruled for tens of thousands of years. One king is described as ruling for 28,800 years, another for 36,000. And before the Great Flood, the list claims that kingship descended from heaven. That phrase alone is enough to make the document feel mysterious. Kingship descended from heaven. To the ancient Sumerians, kingship was not merely a political office. It was sacred. It was something given from above, a divine authority that came down to earth and settled in specific cities. The king list describes power moving from one city to another. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sipar, Shurupak. These were not imaginary places to the people who wrote the list. They were part of a sacred geography, a memory of the world before and after disaster. Then comes the flood. Just like in many ancient traditions, the Sumerian king list divides history into a time before the flood and a time after it. Before the flood, the kings live impossibly long lives. After the flood, the reigns become shorter, more human, and more believable. This strange pattern has led to centuries of debate. Were the long reigns symbolic? Were they based on a different mathematical system? Were they meant to show that the earliest rulers belonged to a mythical age when the world was closer to the gods? Or could the list preserve a distorted memory of ancient dynasties that were later exaggerated into legend? Some people connect the Sumerian king list to the long lifespans in the Book of Genesis, where figures before the flood also lived for hundreds of years. Adam, Seth, Methuselah, Noah, all belong to a world where time seems larger, slower, and stranger. This shared idea is fascinating. Across the ancient Near East, there seems to have been a belief that the world before the flood was different from the world after it. A deeper age, a grander age, an age closer to heaven. For those interested in ancient alien theories, the phrase kingship descended from heaven has taken on an even stranger meaning. Some wonder if the Sumerians were describing contact with beings from the sky, misunderstood as gods by early humanity. Mainstream historians do not need that explanation. To them, the king list is a political and religious document, blending real rulers with mythic memory. But even then, the mystery remains. Why did the Sumerians imagine such vast ages? Why did they place a great flood at the center of history? And why did they believe civilization itself had come down from above? The Sumerian king list is not just a list of names. It is a window into how one of the world's first civilizations understood time, power, divinity, and memory. A clay tablet whispering that before ordinary history began, there was another age, an age of impossible kings, an age before the flood, an age when, according to the ancient words, kingship first descended from heaven. In the ancient texts of India, there are stories of flying machines. They are called Vimanas. The word can mean a palace, a chariot, or a vehicle of the gods. But in some of the old epics and legends, Vimanas are described in ways that feel strangely mechanical, almost as if they belong to a world far beyond ordinary mythology. They move through the sky. They carry gods, kings, and heroes. They shine with light. They travel across great distances. And sometimes, they appear in stories of war. The most famous references come from ancient Sanskrit literature, especially the great Indian epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. These texts are vast, layered, and deeply sacred to many people. They contain philosophy, theology, family drama, cosmic battles, moral lessons, and visions of time so enormous that they make ordinary history feel small. Inside these ancient stories are flying vehicles that drift between heaven and earth. One of the most famous is the Pushpaka Vimana, a flying palace associated with the king Ravana and later with Rama. It is described as beautiful, shining, and able to travel wherever its owner desires. To traditional readers, this is part of a sacred epic world, a divine vehicle, a symbol of royal and heavenly power. But to modern ancient mystery theorists, the Vimanas have become something else. They ask whether these descriptions could be distant memories of advanced technology. Could the gods of ancient India have been imagined as sky travelers because the people who told these stories had witnessed something extraordinary? Were the glowing chariots of the heavens simply mythic poetry? Or were they ancient attempts to describe machines no one fully understood? The idea becomes even more mysterious when people point to descriptions of powerful weapons in the Mahabharata. Some passages describe fiery projectiles, blinding light, roaring explosions, and devastation on a massive scale. These images have sometimes been compared to modern weapons, though mainstream scholars caution that epic language is often symbolic, exaggerated, and poetic. Still, the feeling remains. The ancient texts sometimes speak with a scale that feels almost impossible. Cities burn, armies vanish, weapons fall from the sky. The heavens become part of the battlefield. For historians, the Vimanas are best understood within the religious and literary imagination of ancient India. They belong to a universe where gods interact with humans, where cosmic order is constantly tested, and where divine vehicles move naturally between realms. But for those drawn to ancient alien theories, the Vimanas are among the most fascinating clues in the world, because they suggest that long before airplanes, rockets, and spacecraft, human beings were already imagining flight, not as a simple dream, but as something grand, structured, and powerful. Perhaps the Vimanas were never machines. Perhaps they were symbols. Perhaps they were visions of the divine. Or perhaps they reveal something even deeper, that the human mind has always looked upward and wondered what might be moving through the sky. In the quiet spaces of ancient India's epics, the Vimanas still hover. Golden palaces in the clouds, chariots of gods and kings, dreams of flight written thousands of years before the modern age. And whether they were myth, memory, or mystery, they remind us that the sky has always been one of humanity's oldest questions. In the 1930s, near Baghdad, archaeologists discovered a small object that would become one of the most debated artifacts in ancient mystery circles. It did not look dramatic at first. There were no golden statues, no enormous temple ruins, no carved image of a forgotten god, just a small clay jar, about the size of a simple household vessel, with a copper cylinder inside and an iron rod running through the center. To many people, it looked ordinary, but to others, it looked strangely familiar. It looked like a battery. The object became known as the Baghdad Battery. It is usually associated with the Parthian or Sasanian period, long after the earliest civilizations of Mesopotamia, but still ancient by modern standards. The idea that such an object might have produced electricity immediately captured the imagination. The theory is simple. If the jar were filled with an acidic liquid, such as vinegar or wine, the copper and iron inside could create a small electrical charge, not enough to power a city, not enough to light a building, but enough, perhaps, to create a tiny current. And that possibility opened a strange question. Did people in the ancient world know how to use electricity? Some suggested the object may have been used for electroplating, coating one metal with another. Others imagined it being used in rituals, medicine, or temple ceremonies, where a small electric shock might have seemed magical or divine. Imagine an ancient priest holding a hidden device. A worshipper touches a sacred object. A faint shock passes through the body. To someone in that world, it might have felt like the presence of a god. Of course, mainstream archaeology is more cautious. Many scholars argue that the so-called battery may not have been a battery at all. It may have been a storage vessel for scrolls, a ritual container, or an object whose purpose has been misunderstood because its organic parts have disappeared over time. There is no clear evidence that ancient Mesopotamians used electrical devices in daily life. No wires, no lamps, no machines, no written instructions explaining how to generate current. And yet, the mystery remains compelling because the object does work in principle. When replicas are built and filled with the right liquid, they can produce a small voltage. That does not prove the ancient people used it that way, but it shows that the possibility is not completely impossible. And that is where the Baghdad Battery lives, in the space between proven history and unsettling possibility. It reminds us that ancient technology was not primitive in the way people sometimes imagine. Ancient engineers built roads, canals, temples, aqueducts, observatories, siege machines, and monuments that still challenge modern understanding. They studied metals. They worked with chemistry. They experimented with materials. They understood practical things through observation, even when they did not explain them in modern scientific language. So perhaps the Baghdad Battery was simply a misunderstood jar, or perhaps it was a forgotten experiment, a small piece of ancient knowledge that never became a revolution, a spark that appeared too early, in a world not yet ready to build around it. And that may be the most fascinating thought of all, not that the ancient world had electricity like ours, but that somewhere, in a quiet workshop or temple chamber, someone may have discovered a hidden force inside metal, liquid, and clay. A tiny current, a strange sensation, a whisper of energy. Then, over centuries, the knowledge faded. The jar was buried. The world moved on. And the little object waited in the earth, carrying a question that still has not been fully answered. In the early 1500s, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis created a map that would become one of the most mysterious documents in the history of cartography. At first glance, it looks like a beautiful old sea chart, drawn on gazelle skin, marked with coastlines, islands, notes, ships, and strange creatures. The map belongs to the age of exploration, when sailors were beginning to connect oceans, continents, and distant worlds. But the mystery is not simply that the map exists. The mystery is what some people believe it shows. The surviving portion of the Piri Reis map includes parts of the western coasts of Europe and Africa, as well as the eastern coast of South America. For a map created in 1513, this alone is impressive. The Americas had only recently entered European awareness, and reliable geographic knowledge was still incomplete, scattered, and often distorted. Piri Reis himself wrote that he used many older sources to create his map. Some were Portuguese charts, some were Arab maps, and according to his own notes, some may have come from maps associated with Christopher Columbus. So the map was not created from nothing. It was a collection of older knowledge, a stitched-together memory of the world as sailors, explorers, and scholars understood it. But in the 20th century, a strange theory appeared. Some researchers suggested that the southern part of the map might show the coastline of Antarctica, not as it appears today covered in ice, but as it might have looked long ago without its frozen covering. If true, that would be astonishing. Antarctica was not officially seen by modern explorers until centuries after Piri Reis, and the idea that an ancient map could show its hidden coastline would suggest that someone, somewhere, had mapped the world with a level of knowledge far beyond what history usually allows. This theory became popular in ancient mystery circles. Some imagined a lost civilization with advanced navigation. Others connected the map to Atlantis. Others wondered if ancient seafarers had crossed oceans and charted coastlines long before the age of European exploration. Mainstream historians and cartographers are far more cautious. Many argue that the supposed Antarctic coastline is more likely a distorted extension of South America, copied and bent through the imperfect map-making methods of the time. Old maps often stretched, rotated, duplicated, or misread coastlines. What looks mysterious to modern eyes may simply be the result of combining many sources into one imperfect chart. And yet, the Piri Reis map still feels haunting. Because even if the Antarctica theory is wrong, the map reminds us of something important. The ancient and medieval world was not as isolated as we sometimes imagine. Knowledge moved. Sailors carried stories across ports. Maps were copied, traded, stolen, corrected, and lost. A coastline drawn in one place might pass through dozens of hands before appearing on another map centuries later. The Piri Reis map is not only a map of geography, it is a map of memory, a record of how human beings tried to understand a world that was larger than their instruments, larger than their empires, and larger than their certainty. Perhaps it does not prove a lost advanced civilization. Perhaps it does not reveal Antarctica before the ice. But it does reveal the strange life of knowledge itself. How fragments survive. How errors become mysteries. How old charts carry whispers of journeys we may never fully reconstruct. And how sometimes, when we look at a map, we are not only seeing land and sea, we are seeing what people once believed the world might be. High in the dry desert plains of southern Peru, there are enormous drawings carved into the earth. Some are simple lines. Some are geometric shapes. Some form animals, a hummingbird, a monkey, a spider, a whale, a condor. From the ground, many of them are difficult to understand. They stretch too far across the desert floor, too wide and too strange to fully see while standing beside them. But from above, the images come alive. This is what makes the Nazca lines so mysterious. They seem almost designed for the sky. The Nazca lines were created more than 1,000 years ago by the Nazca culture, long before airplanes, satellites, or modern surveying tools. The desert helped preserve them, because the region is one of the driest places on Earth. With little rain and little vegetation, the marks stayed visible across the centuries. The technique was simple, but powerful. The Nazca people removed the dark reddish stones from the surface of the desert, revealing the lighter soil beneath. In this way, they drew across the land itself. Some lines run straight for miles. Some shapes are so large they are best appreciated from the air. And that has led to one of the most famous ancient mystery questions of all. Who were they meant for? Mainstream archaeology offers several possibilities. The lines may have had religious or ceremonial purposes. Some may have marked pathways for rituals. Others may have connected to water, fertility, astronomy, or sacred landscapes. In a desert world where water meant survival, the lines may have been part of rituals asking the gods for rain. But ancient mystery theorists have imagined something stranger. What if the Nazca lines were landing strips? What if they were signals? What if they were messages meant for beings in the sky? This theory became especially popular in ancient alien circles. The logic is easy to understand. If the drawings are best seen from above, then perhaps they were made for someone above. But the truth may be quieter and more human. Ancient people did not need airplanes to understand the sky. They watched it constantly. They studied the sun, the stars, the clouds, the seasons, and the horizon. The sky was not empty to them. It was alive with meaning. So perhaps the Nazca lines were not made for aliens or aircraft. Perhaps they were made for gods, or ancestors, or spirits, or for ritual processions where the act of walking the lines mattered more than seeing the whole design at once. Still, the mystery remains powerful because the scale is so hard to ignore. There is something dreamlike about a giant hummingbird lying silent in the desert, a spider drawn across dry earth, long lines pointing toward unknown distances, shapes that feel like they belong to both land and sky. The Nazca lines remind us that ancient people often thought bigger than we expect. They transformed landscapes into sacred maps. They wrote prayers into stone, sand, and soil. They made art that could survive far beyond a single lifetime. And perhaps that is the real wonder. Not that the lines prove contact from another world, but that human beings, living in a harsh desert more than 1,000 years ago, created something so vast and precise that we are still looking down at it in amazement. The Nazca lines are not just drawings. They are quiet messages across time, messages written into the earth, waiting for someone, somewhere, to finally see them from above. Few ancient objects have inspired as much mystery as the Ark of the Covenant. In the Hebrew Bible, the Ark was not simply a sacred chest. It was the holiest object of ancient Israel. A golden vessel built to hold the tablets of the Ten Commandments, carried through the wilderness, placed in the tabernacle, and eventually brought into the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. It was described as being made of acacia wood and covered in gold, with 2 cherubim facing one another on its lid. Between these figures, the presence of God was said to appear. To the ancient Israelites, the Ark was a symbol of covenant, power, law, and divine presence. But the stories surrounding it are not gentle. The Ark is often described as dangerous. When it is carried into battle, armies tremble. When enemies capture it, disaster follows. When people touch it carelessly, they die. It is not treated like an ordinary religious object. It is treated like something charged with overwhelming sacred force. And then, at some point, it disappears. The Bible does not clearly tell us what finally happened to the Ark. When the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and the first temple in 586 BCE, many treasures were taken away. But the Ark is not clearly listed among them. It simply vanishes from the story. That silence created one of the greatest mysteries in religious history. Where did it go? Some believe the Ark was destroyed when the temple fell. Others believe priests hid it beneath the Temple Mount before the Babylonians arrived. Some legends say it was taken to a secret chamber, buried deep below Jerusalem, waiting to be revealed at the end of days. Another famous tradition says the Ark was carried far away to Ethiopia, where it remains guarded in the city of Aksum. According to this belief, the Ark is kept in a chapel and watched over by a single guardian who never leaves its presence. No one is allowed to see it. And so the mystery continues. For ancient mystery theorists, the Ark has become something even stranger. Some have wondered whether its deadly power could be explained as electricity, radiation, or some lost ancient technology. The golden surface, the sacred rules for carrying it, the danger of touching it, and the strange effects surrounding it have all inspired theories that the Ark was more than a religious chest. Maybe it was a weapon. Maybe it was a communication device. Maybe it was a vessel for a force ancient people understood in spiritual terms, but modern people might describe differently. Mainstream historians are careful with these ideas. To them, the Ark belongs to the world of ancient Israelite religion, temple ritual, and sacred symbolism. Its power was theological, not technological. But even if that is true, the Ark remains haunting, because it sits at the center of a story where faith, empire, war, and disappearance all meet. A sacred object is built. It guides a people. It rests in a great temple. Then the temple burns. The city falls. The object vanishes. And for more than 2,000 years, people continue to wonder where it went. Perhaps the Ark lies destroyed, its gold melted down, and its wood turned to dust. Perhaps it is hidden beneath ancient stone. Perhaps it rests in a guarded chapel, unseen by the world. Or perhaps the greatest mystery is not where the Ark is now, but why its absence still feels so powerful. Some objects disappear from history, but they do not disappear from imagination. The Ark of the Covenant remains one of those objects, a golden chest, a vanished relics, a sacred mystery waiting in the shadows of the ancient world. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is one artifact unlike all the others. Most of the scrolls are written on parchment or papyrus, fragile, ancient, browned by time. But this one was written on copper, thin sheets of metal engraved with strange instructions, rolled up and hidden away in the desert near the Dead Sea. It became known as the Copper Scroll, and unlike many ancient religious texts, it does not read like a prayer, a prophecy, or a piece of scripture. It reads like a treasure map. The Copper Scroll was discovered in the 1950s at Qumran, the same general area where the famous Dead Sea Scrolls were found. But when scholars began to study it, they realized it was very different from the other writings. It listed locations. It described hidden deposits. It mentioned gold, silver, vessels, and offerings buried or concealed in specific places. Some entries speak of treasure hidden beneath steps. Others mention caves, cisterns, channels, tombs, and underground chambers. The amounts described are enormous. So enormous, in fact, that people have debated whether the treasure was real, symbolic, exaggerated, or connected to the wealth of the Jerusalem temple before its destruction. That is where the mystery begins. If the Copper Scroll is a real inventory, then who buried the treasure? Was it the treasure of the Second Temple, hidden before Roman armies destroyed Jerusalem in 70 CE? Was it wealth belonging to a religious community near Qumran? Was it a coded list of sacred objects, offerings, or temple vessels that were hidden during a time of war? Or was it something else entirely? The locations are difficult to identify today. Ancient landmarks disappeared. Names changed. Valleys shifted. Structures collapsed. And some descriptions may have referred to places that only made sense to the people who wrote them. Imagine being handed a map with directions from a world that no longer exists. Turn near the old aqueduct. Dig beneath the third stone. Look beside the tomb of so-and-so. Find the opening near the dry channel. But the aqueduct is gone. The stones are scattered. The tomb is forgotten. And the dry channel has changed course over 2,000 years. This is what makes the Copper Scroll so fascinating. It feels practical, almost urgent, yet it is nearly impossible to use. Some treasure hunters have tried to follow its clues. Most searches have found nothing that clearly matches the scroll's enormous claims. Still, the possibility remains. Somewhere in the hills, caves, or ruins around the Dead Sea, there may be hidden deposits that were never recovered. Gold wrapped in cloth. Silver vessels sealed in a chamber. Temple offerings buried before disaster. Or perhaps the treasure was found long ago, quietly removed, melted down, and absorbed into history without record. Mainstream scholars remain cautious. The Copper Scroll is real, but the treasure it describes remains uncertain. Yet even uncertainty has power, because the scroll captures a moment of fear. Someone believed something needed to be hidden. Someone took the time to engrave the locations onto metal, not parchment, perhaps because metal would last longer. Someone expected the message to survive. And it did. The Copper Scroll outlived kingdoms, armies, languages, and empires. It waited in the desert until the modern world found it. And now it leaves us with one of the oldest treasure mysteries ever discovered. A list of hidden wealth. A map without a living memory. A metal scroll whispering from the caves of the Dead Sea that somewhere beneath the dust, something sacred may still be waiting.